Hello and welcome to the sixth episode in Arts Management in Africa. My name is Taiwa Folabi, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by Nika Jonah and Daniel Kumapayi, and they're going to be introducing themselves at some point, and of course, with my co-host Natasha Eck. Um, just want to start by acknowledging that I am dialing in from the territories of the Nayawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis and Métis Nations, which is also known as 34 Regina in Saskatchewan in Canada. I'm also with the Center for Socially Engaged Theater, and I'm really excited for us to be having our sixth episode. Interestingly, sixth. I can't imagine. We're almost there, sixth. And today we're going to be talking about practical tips for art managers. I'll pass it on to Natasha to introduce herself, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Thank you, Taiwo. Yes, my name is Natasha Eck. I'm co-host today. Happy to be here and to learn more about Nike and Daniel. I'm an artist, Afro-Caribbean artist, and arts administrator, who is residing in Ontario, Canada. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Taiwo.
Thanks so much, Natasha. I want to quick shout out to all our partners. Of course, Howround Theatre Commons for their support and believing in this idea. Thanks to Pan-African Creative Exchange. Nika Jonah is here. She's going to speak more to that. And thanks to the Center for Social Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina, which I serve as the director. And also thanks to Theatre Emissary International and its social enterprise mobile research lab for all the research and the background work. And also thanks to Kininso Creatives for their support, and to Lacite at the University of Regina for their support in French translations and interpretation. Today we have two amazing guests. Nika Jonah, a friend, a colleague, a sister. It seems we've been kind of doing back and forth for some couple of years now. Really remarkable work that Nika is doing with Pan-African Creative Exchange. And we're going to be sharing, Nika will be sharing about practical tips for art management managers on the continent, but also for art managers that are in the diaspora. And today I get to talk to my friend Daniel, who I've been able to meet one-on-one with him now, I think once, and I've ever since kind of following some of the work that he's doing in the US, which he's gonna speak to, and Daniel is also has some affiliation to triple AE. If he wants to talk about that, for sure he can. But Daniel is doing remarkable work in the US in the music space, and particularly really creating opportunity to archive, to preserve, to market, and to find really a robust landscape for artists in the US, but in US and beyond. So today it's really amazing that we're going to be having this chat with both of them. I'll start with Nika to introduce herself, and I'll pass it to Daniel, and then we keep it going with our questions. So over to you, Nika. Just introduce yourself, and then we'll pass it to Daniel.
Hello, good morning, good evening. I'm Nika Jonah. I'm one of the co-exec directors of the Pan-African Creative Exchange. So I work between the UK and Africa and the rest of the world. I'll leave it at that for now. It's my intro.
Thanks, Nika. Daniel?
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm the founder and executive director of Akojopo. I'm also the EDI research fellow for the Association of Arts Administrator Educators. And yes.
And that's the triple AE that I talked about. So to give both of you, and then hopefully you've taken a look at the 5 episodes that we've done. What we've done over the past 5 episodes is really to dig deep into key aspects of art management, from intellectual property to cultural policy to fundraising to all of the practicality that comes to and the challenges that comes with art management on the continent. There's some couple of things that we've highlighted over the weeks. Is that Africa, it's a continent, 54 countries, and even though we have shared experiences, at times challenges can also be kind of different in some ways. So we've kind of taken the time to look at the challenges. One being the need to professionalize art management as is, within the ecosystem. We also talked about the need for research. That a lot of the decision that we need to make, that leaders need to make, need to be backed up by research, by data, and we need art administrators, art managers that are really invested in this. We also talk about the need to really rethink the idea of art itself, especially when we're operating in an environment and a culture where, because art is intrinsic, we always think that commercializing it, putting money to it and all of that, we feel very not so good about it because we feel like, oh, where we need to preserve what has been given to us by our ancestors, and they never pay for it and all that. But we were reminded of the idea of the fact that it's always about exchange. Like as artists working, doing different things, creating, they are exchanging. It's a value proposition. And what are you exchanging for? Your time. What are you exchanging for in creating whatever you're creating as artists? There has to be an exchange, right? And all of that. We also mentioned, and again, this our guest, we also talk about the need to build capacity. When it comes to art management on the continent, capacity building is something that really need more work, whether it's from individual to organizations. And we actually see from research that a lot of the capacity building initiatives are mostly coming from individual organizations. Of course, the philanthropic industry or sector also need to be rethink from our own perspective as an African. So we've gone through so many ideas and examples and different things that folks are doing. And so today, what Natasha and I really want to set going with both of you is to share with us from your experience, based on some of these ideas and more, some of those practical things that are critical for art managers on the continent, and for those and for art managers, of course, outside the continent of Africa. So I'd like to start with Daniel, and then we'll come to Nika. Let's switch it this time around. Do you want to tell us your journey into the world of art management and art administration and all of that? What's your journey into the practice? Now, it's not again, the focus of this episode is to talk about the practice of art management. And I think that's what we've been trying to do over the episode, not to sound so theoretical, because again, there are many people that are really interested in doing this, or they are doing this already, but they don't have it labeled and they want to get better in what they're doing. So what's your journey to the practice of art management? Over to you, Daniel.
Yeah, so I was born in Nigeria and I left when I was 5, and I've been in the US for pretty much most of my life, and I didn't go back to Nigeria for about 15 years. And I want to reference a book called I believe it's The Miseducation of the Negro. It's by Dr. Carter Woodson, and it kind of talked about how US educational systems at times don't empower Black people to empower themselves, but at times they educate them in a way that can serve the interest of like white culture and institutions. And the reason why I referenced that is because I was a music major at the University of Michigan. And for most of my time, I didn't really know much about what was going on in regards to Africa and just arts management. But it was during my senior recital, I decided to perform a work by Akinuba. And then I realized through that, there's a lot of barriers. And then when I later went back to Nigeria, like 3 years ago for the first time after 15 years, I realized, wow, there's a whole world I just was not aware about. And I just kind of realized my whole music or artistic career has been kind of serving more so like these white cultural institutions in both the pieces that I play. And through that experience going back to Nigeria, I developed a passion for understanding more about what goes on in Africa. When I did my master's in public administration, I took a course on strategic management, and I realized that, man, things are a lot different. Like when I was in Nigeria, for example, just some of the stuff that I learned within the US, some of it is applicable, but I think it's also really key to understand just a different terrain in Nigeria. Like, you know, when I registered as a nonprofit in the US, it was pretty simple. When I registered as a nonprofit in Nigeria, man, it was this feeling of I use this term like it was like this feeling of guerrilla tactics. Like you have to be very aware of the society, of the environment you're going in, because you know, when I was in Nigeria, I had to use a family relative who was well connected to open up just our bank account, because just me being a Nigerian American going there, not even the act of trying to do our work, just trying to register, it was so tricky. It just wasn't simple. So I think in terms of my journey, I think again that trip back was a key thing, and just in terms of understanding what goes on in Nigeria and just the idea of arts management. One thing that I realized that is different from a performance major, from an arts manager, it's the technical skills. So I've met a lot of people in Nigeria who maybe say they're arts administrators, but then I really gauge your ability based off your technical skills. So you can play music, but can you do an Excel sheet? You know, are you familiar with making stage plots? Those technical skills, I think, are what will really define you as an arts manager. So I'll leave it
I
at
think
that.
it's Peter Drucker that said that culture plays strategy for breakfast or something like that, or at least, or the statement is a, you know, is being named after him, and maybe not. And it speaks to the piece you're talking about, the cultural piece, the cultural context of a particular place, having that local context. It's really critical. Thanks, Daniel. Nike, your own journey is a little bit, you know, again, we've been engaging for over some years now. So do you want to, you know, your journey, it's a different kind of journey. Do you want to give us a little bit access into that and the practice of of art management?
Yes, I started off in design. I wanted to be a fashion designer. I went and enrolled when my mother had gone to Nigeria to do some business, because she wouldn't have allowed me to enroll at the time. She's very supportive now. So I studied design, and then after design, I studied business studies. And then very, very early career, I moved to New York. And New York was really, for me, an opportunity to just explore something creative that I hadn't got a name for, I hadn't figured out what it was that I liked doing. But I worked in New York, I worked in music industry, I worked at Island Records, I worked at advertising agency, I worked as a model agent, I worked as a photographer's rep. So I worked across the board in the creative industry. And I found out very quickly that I'm interested in taking something that's an idea and developing it into something. And as I've got older, that's something that's got to be about change. It's got to be about advancement. And when I moved back to England, I just by chance ended up working on a program of work at the Arts Council England. And I ended up doing a long stint. The Arts Council England, for those who don't know, is a policy and the development agency for the arts in England. It funds, I think it was at one point, it was close to $1 billion a year. I think that figure is severely reduced now. But I worked there for a number of years, and I really learned what Daniel was talking about, is the technical side of arts management, how to, you know, set up a project, how to plan a project, how to work more in partnership with people, how to birth an idea and to keep it going, because, you know, a lot of arts projects are gestating. You need time to develop the idea and to develop the partnerships and the funding, whatever way you choose to fund it. And so that was my journey's in that. But I think through I've had lots of jobs within the arts, and I guess we'll touch upon them later, but also things that I think sort of intersect with strengthening myself as an arts manager. And I think out of everything I do, I think the best way for me to describe what I do is I'm in the practice of creating space. And that space might be showcasing work, it might be mentoring, it might be policy development, but it's about creating space for those that don't normally have access, those that don't, whose voices are marginalized. I'm very interested in how do you spotlight invisibility And I've realized across everything I've done, whether it was in the music industry or it was in fashion, I've always done that. But for a long time, I didn't have the name for it. So I think it's great that we're having these conversations.
So Daniel talked about the culture, context, and the technical skills, and for you also, you're talking about the technical skills. We're gonna come back to that because I'd like to know more, particularly, Nick, I know you've taken on different roles across different organizations, even at the board level and all of that, and how all of that contributes to technical skills. Daniel, same thing for you. I know you've taken, in terms of running your organization and then also supporting other artists in being able to give them space, opportunity to showcase their work and all of that. So that technical skills, but the key word that that kind of come to me is the idea of operation, being an operator, like it's sort of like operating things with those technical skills. We're gonna come back to that, but I know that Natasha has a question for you, and then we'll come back to that. So please keep thinking about how you've developed those. First, what are those technical skills? And then two, how have you been able to develop that over the years based on the roles you've had on? I'll pass it on to Natasha.
Thank you. And I think my question may be kind of leaning a little bit towards that. So my question was, what are the things you wish you knew when you had started? What are the things that you wish you knew when you'd started in arts administration? If somebody was able to give you
I
what
could.
that would have helped you. And I know that Daniel, you're saying right now, you in your journey, you've taken additional courses, the technical aspect, and also we mentioned, time to develop ideas and things like that. What are the steps that we need to kind of structure that? So, Daniel, did you want to speak to that? What are the
Yeah,
things that when you started?
I think I have three things. So I think the first one is the idea of time, luck, and persistence. So when I first started, it can be very daunting looking at other organizations and just thinking, dang, man, things are looking real good over there. And, maybe looking at your organization and maybe how it's starting. But I think for me, time is the patience you give yourself. Luck is the opportunity that you create for yourself. And persistence is that dedication that you put towards, your craft. But I think those three things really work in hand. At times with Akojopo, I've been very lucky. And when I think about the luck, I think it's because I was persistent and we put ourselves out there to create that opportunity. And then I think the other one, in terms of things I wish I knew, read, like read a book. I think the importance of reading is very key. At first I didn't really like to read too much, but I've spent a lot of time reading books about it could be things related to like African scholars, things about like Fellowship One Day talking about like African art music. It could be things in regards to culture and policy. It could be things in regards to arts administration. But I think reading is a pretty free tool. Ideally, yeah, you should buy the book. Don't read illegally, but reading can be a powerful tool to like help you. And then also conflict resolution. I think you can practice conflict resolution within your personal relationships, but at times with a project ball, conflict is something that is very consistent, and conflict is not bad. It's healthy. Sometimes I argue with my mom. Sometimes I argue with my brother. But thinking about how do you resolve that conflict, because it's going to happen. So, yeah.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to pass it over to Nike.
There's lots of things I wish I knew. I think something about confidence. And and then the more you meet people in all sorts of the positions, there's always a sense that we all think we know what we're doing, and we don't always. Sometimes you sort of make it up as you go along. But I came across something recently that one of my colleagues said to me. She said, planned happenstance. And it's this theory around emphasizing that while you can't always control what happens to you, you can prepare to take advantage of the unexpected. And I think there's something quite nice about that, because it gives you permission to know that things aren't always going to go as planned. But in that sort of lack of things not happening the way you want to, it allows you to not stick to a predetermined path. Half the time when I've been in I've been in my jobs, I've not known what the path was, that my routine was always to
Mm.
just talk to people and say, what do you do and how does it intersect with what I do? What could my role do better to help your role? And then people like the fact that you're asking them what they need and you're centering them around the work that you need to do, and you developed a lot of relationships. But I think if I roll off a few things, I think I wish I'd understood about the power of being a very good storyteller and the storyteller across many levels. So as a fundraiser, as that elevator pitch when you're meeting people, at a dinner party, and how you can sort of tell the story of what your mission, vision, and values are in a multitude of ways that hits the right touch point, if you like. So I think there's something in that that I wish I'd been better at. I think I wished that I'm working on it now, but I wish that I'd been more confident in writing. So the writing, I feel, sometimes gets in people's way because they don't want to go for funding, or they don't want to send an email, or they don't want to tell me everything that you just said and in an email. They don't want to kind of work out the heavy lifting in that because maybe they're scared of getting the tone wrong. And I was always scared of tone. Like, I can change my tone when I'm speaking, but when I'm writing, I struggled with making sure that the tone was right. Now, of course, we've got tools like ChatGTP where you can say, you write something and you'll say, can you change the tone to make it more friendly, or to make it more stern, or to make it more professional? And that, I think that's most probably been great for a lot of people. But I think for me, I wish I'd been more confident around that planned happenstance, because there are many, many things that have happened in my career have been around just responding to a moment and thinking, oh, I'll just give it a go. And then it grows into something that I become very, very passionate about. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you. So just to summarize that, both really great insights and just thoughtful reflection. So time, look, and persistence, reading, expanding knowledge, and the weight and kind of like the opening of, you know, being confident in writing and that toning with tone and storytelling, are all things that could, you know, support people in this industry when it comes to setting themselves up for success. So thank you for sharing those responses, and I'll pass it over to Tyra for the next question.
Thanks, Natasha. And so this, you know, conflict resolution, confidence in writing, storytelling. I know there are many grant applications now that they're not even asking you to write, they're asking you to do a video, you know, and all of that. I want to come back to that question because it sounds like these are some of the it's like an iceberg, right? These are some of the things that are in the, you know, in the water that you don't see at the base of the iceberg. You don't see all of these things, but it's manifest. What are other technical skills that you were talking about earlier on? In addition to some of these things that you've mentioned, what are those technical skills? And could you give us an example or two where you've exhibited, you've engaged these technical tools and some of these things that you've mentioned? Maybe it's a project, that you want to kind of just give us examples of how these things have your technical skills have played out in yeah in your work.
I could maybe so one example that's well, I guess let me talk about the technical skills. So it's technical skills. I mean, you could touch upon important one, writing, like for just writing emails, and then the other one is Google, like the suite, this specifically the sheet function specifically, also Canva, Adobe, knowing again you can use a platform like DocuSign, but knowing that you can also create signature documents on Adobe, like merging, MailChimp, Shopify, Squarespace. When we created our website, we had a web developer, but then they kind of like disappeared. And I went to YouTube University, and alongside one of our other team members, we kind of finished up the website. And that was something I had no experience with. I just had to, I like the opportunity at times to just figure it out. Also Monday.com, we use that for our CRM, and also WhatsApp too. I think people use WhatsApp, but also the WhatsApp community feature has been really nice, because when we tried using Slack, a lot of people were not as in tune, and we kind of realized our community is best on WhatsApp. But using the WhatsApp community, and also knowing that on WhatsApp there are ways to like save documents and links so you can like find the message. But if I talked about a specific case, I would reference our African art music commissioning project we did. And I think my strongest technical skill is thinking about production. So in doing that concert, I had to make a production packet, and that production packet had many layers. You know, I had to think about the team in contact, when is your call time, the musicians, when is their call time, all the other people involved, the videographers, the community engagements, any, like even the security guards, the piano tuner, the cocktail vendor, the guest artist coming in, and also thinking about back of house, front of house. So, you know, back of house is in regards to, you know, when should the piano be tuned before the musicians get there? When should the videographer or sound engineer set up, because you don't want them, you know, messing around during the dress rehearsal? You know, when are musicians eating? Just a bunch of thinking. And then outside of that, also the run of show. I had to create a run of show so the person up in the booth knows the lighting cues, who is coming on and off, when should you change the lights, and then even rehearsal announcements to think about. And then I think one really important thing is the packing list. At times you think about, you know, this is so much to think about, but sitting down before the event, I had a packing list, you know, packed for, take it home, and I checked it off. I also had a list for things I had to buy beforehand. And then also the stage plots. So that way, the back of house stage had volunteers. Because when I first got there, we did a concert at Alliance Français in Vegas, and people were, you know, just drawing on a piece of paper. And I was like, no, we shouldn't do that. Like, I got gaff tape, I taped the ground so people know exactly where it should be. And then also with the stage plots for the stage hands, I clearly said, you know, how many stands, how many chairs, what does it look like? So that way, during the dress rehearsal or the day of the event, I want to eliminate as many questions as possible, and everything is on the packet. So that's an example of something that's very technical, specifically in regards to production.
Thanks, Daniel. Nike.
I think I'll give an example of setting up the Pan-African Creative Exchange, our call to artists. So we run a showcase platform that allows artists to present in where they're at the time that the showcase happens. So if their work is still being developed, they might pitch an idea. If it's still in progress, work in progress, they will present in that strand. And if they're ready to go, they're ready to tour, it's a tour ready strand. In order for us to get the outcomes we want, which is quality artists and not having to answer 1,000 questions, we start off with the application, the call. So what does the call say? The call says, Pan-African Creative Exchange, present your work to an audience of people that can buy the work either creatively, so there might be other artists or artistic directors, or financially, there might be funders or people that might buy your work. So with the application form, we took a long time to pull together the questionnaire for the artists, and it did two things. It ensured that the selection panel got the information they needed to make the right decision about the work that needed to be in the showcase, but it also strengthened the skills of the artists who sometimes were not being asked those questions, particularly on the continent. Like we will ask them everything from the sort of background information about them as a company, who their influencers are, who they've worked with, to showcase the support material. What is it? And even in giving support material, people would give you a video of an hour and you're like, what point am I supposed to look at to get excited about your work? So I would say to them, give us the time code and explain a little bit in the application form. So alongside the application form, we wrote very, very strict guidance notes where on every single question, there was something that you could look at in the guidance notes. And if you took the time to look at it and look at some of our videos, it would ensure that you made the best possible application. Because I'd done a very similar program when I was at the Arts Council, and I started in the middle of a very similar showcase that I was running, but I started in the middle of it. And I just remember dreading when the decisions came out, I would dread coming to work because you would have 2 weeks of artists yelling at you, they didn't get in. Some of the relationship managers from the different Arts Council offices demanding to know what's happened to artists in their region and why they're not in. And it's because we didn't have clear guidance notes. So it's about being really clear on what the eligibility criteria is, what are the criteria for quality that we look at, and ensuring that we had a selection panel that could match that. So we had a selection panel of people who were used to looking at work or making work, that were living and working on the continent, but also those that were living and working off, so that you have a little bit of a balance of viewpoints and ensuring that it's not all a Eurocentric viewpoint that is being dominated. So what we found now is this last edition, so we're in our 4th edition of the Pan-African Creative Exchange, and we closed our call in September last year. We had 170 applications, and the hard challenge for us was most probably a good 100 of them were excellent. And for us, we extended the showcase by 1 day, and we thought of all sorts of ways that we could include some of these amazing artists. And we were thinking, gosh, people are now writing to us saying, can I still be in the showcase? We're like, no, that deadline's gone. But what was really great is I said to artists, if you use the questionnaire that we use, you can take your application and use it for other application platforms, other call for artists, because the questions we're asking you, most programmers, most people, funders would want to know the answers to that. So you've got the basis of something. It takes a minute to pull it all together if you haven't done it before. But what it does is it ensures that the artists stay on the toes. It ensures that we get what we want. And it's about sometimes people recognizing, like, what is it that you want? We want a great program. We want a program that reflects the diversity and the dynamism of Pan-African work on the continent. We want to make sure that we are not replicating stereotypes of what people think African work is. So we want the best and the most interesting work to come through. So that also connects to how we talk about ourselves, what our website looks like. But I think the call for artists was exciting for the artists, but it was also exciting for people who potentially would come to our showcase as delegates. I hope that gives you a sense of a practical tool, but really thinking about the paperwork and what is it that you're communicating, and thinking about what is it that you want, and backing out of that, saying, okay, I need to make sure the selection process is the right panel, selection panel people are there. I have to make sure that the guidance notes and the call is very comprehensive and considers people who are speaking English as a 3rd or 4th language, or English is not, who are neurodiverse, and all those other things. So we try to think about that, because we always, for me, I always say, let's do the heavy lifting now, because we don't want to do it later. It's so much harder to answer lots and lots of questions at the other end. It's better to spend a little bit of time planning with your team and getting it right and testing out the call or the information with people in your network. So that's what we do a lot of.
Interesting. So thank you to both of you, because you're not just talking as art managers. You're also giving us example as a program manager and also as a production manager. Like Daniel, like all of those things you're doing would kind of fall under that production, right? You know, your stage, your run of show, all of those things. And Anika, in terms of being a program manager, it is bringing together all of these things as an operator. It's in terms of process of bringing it together. I'm going to pass it on to Natasha, but I wanted to think about this question around funding, because that's also a big piece that, as both of you know, it's also something you have to grapple with every single time. What are the things that you've learned over the years, practical tips that can help, emerging art managers in how to think about the mindset and the thinking around funding and fundraising? Think about that question, and I'll Natasha, over to you for the next question, and I will come to that.
Thank you, Tyler. So this next question is around how you might guide potential art managers to prepare for this kind of role, and what are some of the challenges they could potentially face? Like, how would what would you share with a potential art manager professional, or somebody that's actually doing this work, just starting out? You know, how could they best prepare for this type of role, and what are some of the biggest challenges or opportunities for growth could they, you know, foresee as they journey into this industry?
I would say,
Yeah, Nikkei.
I think for any art manager coming in, you have to understand who your networks are.
Hmm.
And when you come out with a figure, forgive me, Tyra, I've said this 1,000 times. When I was at the Arts Council, we worked in a diversity and equality team, and we were constantly looking for ways to ensure that our policies and that our ways of working was reaching as many people as possible. And a figure that stuck with me is 80% of your opportunities come from your networks. 80% from your network. So if you look at me, I'm actually very well connected. You could actually, you'd think that I'd get lots and lots of opportunities that I'm not applying for. I left the Arts Council in 2012, so that's what, 13, 14 years, whatever. I've had one job where I didn't know the person. And what happened is she'd come across me in a magazine, saw that my name looked Nigerian. She Googled me. She said, "Oh, you're Nigerian, and can you come and talk, give a talk at the Royal College of Arts?" That is it, £150. And I say it because if you don't go in understanding the power of your networks and how to navigate those networks and nurture those networks, it's going to be very difficult, especially if you're from a marginalized or minoritized community. If you're a woman, if you're from outside of a main centre, so I'm based in London, if you're living outside of London, it's much, much harder. And in places like Africa, I would say that 80% figure gets closer to 100. So I think people have to understand how to nurture and support and grow their networks. It's something that Tyra will say that I'm kind of known for doing it. I take pride in nurturing my networks, and that comes in a variety of ways. It might be offering mentoring. It might be offering some kind of support or some kind of insight. Sharing. So I'm very big on sharing information that I have with a wider group of people that might not have access to that information. So when I left New York and I moved back to England, I struggled to get work, and I was like, what is going on? And what happened is somebody was working at the Arts Council and she needed someone to come and help her on a project. And I was one person that she'd met in New York and she stayed in contact with. And by doing that program for 3 months, they said to me, "Look, we've got another job going. Do you want to apply?" And that's how I got it. And I keep asking myself, how would I have ever got that job at the Arts Council without having been inside Thurs, without having some insider knowledge? And I don't know what I would have done so much differently. And I think there's something about, I always kept in touch with this lady. I'd met her in New York. She'd asked me to support her on a project. I said, "Look, I'll do it because I'm bored. I just want to use my brain and do stuff." And by working with her on this project for free, she then wanted to repay the favor and said, "Oh, I've got this paid job. Do you want to do it?" It's only 3 months. And then I ended up being there for nearly 9 years. So that kind of gives you an example. I think there's something about really understanding how to nurture those networks, and it will come in all sorts of ways that you nurture the networks. It can sometimes be sharing, it can sometimes be advocating for them. Tyro's a great guy in Canada. He's running this Centre for Socially Engaged Theatre and passing on his name. And after a while, people know you as somebody that shares and is generous with your networks. And that is your cultural currency, that's your cultural capital. It's very, very powerful. And I don't think the networks necessarily have to all be in the arts, because I've got networks of people who are in, my sister's a forensic psychologist. She sometimes will bring 20 people to see a theatre show because she's interested in characters and plot twists, because that's part of how her brain works and the kind of work that she does. And then I've got another sister who's a lawyer who's interested in other sorts of things in relation to the arts. And I think there's something about not just sticking to the form that you're in. If you're in music, don't just stay in music. Look at what visual arts is doing. Look at what the people that are aligned with your values in theatre might be doing. Be more intersectional and multi-sectional in terms of multidisciplinary, in terms of how you engage. I engage across everything. like I said, I've worked in fashion, I've worked in music, I've worked in visual arts. I engage in all those places. You'll find me dipping my toe in all these places because I'm quite curious. I find it quite interesting because I'm always interested in ways that I can sharpen what I'm doing, make it better for because I want it to be as easy as possible for me, but also I want it to be a powerful experience, a meaningful experience for those that we say we're here to serve.
Thank you so much, Nike. Daniel.
I think that I would add in terms of preparation, the importance of listening. And I think my girlfriend is helpful in me doing that because at times I find that I'm not the best listener. And I think in moments when I'm not the best listener, it affects my ability to be a good leader to people because it could be a team member telling me something. And based on how I listen, that will kind of dictate my response. And my response will either let them know, was this person listening or was this person not listening? And I think it goes in regards to any relationship that you may have, whether it's a potential funder, an audience member that came to your concert, you know, how well are you really listening? And I think that's something you can practice in just your daily life. Outside of listening, I'd also add self-discipline. I, as I was telling y'all earlier, I'm an avid runner. I love to run. And the reason why I love to run is because it helps me in so many aspects of my life. Because when I first came to Chicago and I did a triathlon, I didn't know how to swim. And learning how to swim was a big personal journey. And then doing a triathlon was an even bigger one. And after I did that triathlon, I just felt that no one can stop me. And now when I go back to doing a Akojopo, I have that same mentality because being able to overcome something that I didn't think I could do. Now when it's maybe I'm doing a Akojopo and it's in regards to maybe applying for a grant or just the daily repetition of kind of doing the same thing over and over again, kind of falling in love with that because when I run, it's the same thing. I go out and run, whether it's 5, 6, 7 miles, and fall in love with that process. So I think listening and discipline is very key because when I first started coaching ball, that feeling I had, that excitement of what we could do, it's still there. But when it gets hard, sometimes I forget about it. But I realized that it's not always going to be there. It's that discipline that is really key. And motivation is, I don't know. I don't believe in motivation. I believe in discipline. So yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. I kind of see the intersection of kind of like networking, nurturing your network and listening as being super important. Those things go hand in hand. And that kind of like mindset, the discipline and being open to sharing and advocating in different spaces. Yeah, I find that really interesting and helpful. So thank you for sharing those insights. I'm going to pass this over to Tyrell for the next question.
Thanks, Natasha. Nika, you talked about nurturing your relationship, and this is really key, like extremely key. And Daniel, you talked about this idea of discipline, and listening is part of the need to discipline yourself. Anyways, discipline, and of course, motivation and discipline kind of go together. You need to be motivated to do whatever you want to do and all of that. If you're talking to an artist who doesn't, a lot of artists, some, not a lot, some artists they're of the opinion that I'm just going to do my thing and I'm out of here. They don't like all these things we're talking about. I'm just going to come and showcase my work and yeah, that's it and all that. How might you want to offer them some thoughts to pay attention to art management? Especially when you're going in an environment where, and Nika, we see this all the time, where artists just like, and there are times that you're asking them some questions not because they've never thought about it, because it's always, I'm just going to come and showcase my work and I'm out. But to showcase your work, what's the intention? Have you thought about the audience? Have you thought about what needs to be in your package? Have you thought about how you're going to do your video? Have you thought about your elevator speech? Have you, like, they've not, I'm just going to showcase I'm just going to just come and what's the business side to your work that your work can sustain what you're trying to do in the next 2 years, 3 years? Where do you see that work going? Whether it's music, whether it's theater, whether it's performance, whatever it is. what would be your thoughts to an artist who might be, for lack of a better word, and not trying to be who might not just just see that they're really interested in that. They just want to do and you want to offer them some perspective to think about these aspects of the craft. What would that look like? And then after that, we do go back to the question of fundraising. Any of you can jump in and take on that question. That is half baked somewhere there. Hopefully, you make something.
I'd met Akram Khan, who's like a very famous Southeast Asian choreographer, dancer. And he'd won an award at the South Bank show one year when I was working at the Arts Council. And I said to him, what do you think? I went up to him afterwards and said, what do you think it is that has made it possible for you to do all the things you want to do? And my boss said at the time, oh, it's because he's brilliant. And he said, no, it isn't. It's because I respect Farouk Chaudhry, which was his producer. He said, it is a partnership. If I want certain results, Farouk sometimes needs tools to be able to get those results for me. And the only way he's going to get those results is if I bend and I work with him. You can't say I want 1,000 people in the stadium and then you're not giving him the tools and things that he needs, that he can help get to the results that are required. So there was something about, and they've been working together for maybe over 25, 30 years, I think. Very, very successfully. He did the opening ceremony at the Cultural Olympiad, so the Olympics in 2012. He did the opening ceremony. He's done lots of sort of large-scale events, but still working with the same guy. And I think there has to be this mutual respect, because sometimes there is this perception that artists can be a little bit diva-ish and don't only want green elements or whatever it is. And yes, people should be able to ask for what they need to be able to do the best possible job, but also you have to consider what the arts administrator, your producer, needs in order to support you, support the vision, because they don't want to be in a job where it's slog and tiring and very, very heavy all the time. They want to have some joy within the job, just like the artist wants to have joy in the job. And I think it's about understanding it's a partnership, thinking about what that wraparound might look like. Is it an education program? Is it going and doing outreach? What is it that is going to help you get what you need? And I think it's about, we also have to stop saying things, well, they're an artist, they can't. They're an artist, they can't fill out a form. Of course, most artists can fill out forms. They don't like it, but who likes filling out a form? Who likes doing fundraising? Most people don't, but they do it because it's part of the job. And actually recognizing that there are some aspects of the work that we've all got to take responsibility in. Diversity and equality, engagement, fundraising, all those things, everybody that's part of a team should be part of managing and delivering against those sort of like those big tasks. So I would say that.
Daniel?
I would add that I think in specific cases for Akojopo, I've met a lot of Nigerian musicians that come to the US to study, or they'll come to the UK to study music, voice, instrumental. And I think in their case, at times they don't have the capacity to think about arts administration because they're an international student, they're trying to live, survive in this new country. Also, they could be a performance major. But I always ask them, once you're done performing, once you're done with your career, what's going to be left? And I always kind of meant it's going to be arts administration, because I have a friend who's Igbo, and right now he's performing operas in Chicago, but long term he has this passion for supporting Igbo singers, specifically in Anambra State, and a key part of supporting them is arts administration. So I was really happy because he's doing this arts administration program through Roosevelt University, and he got funding to do this Igbo folk song concert. And Akojopo is a partner helping him with the arts administration. But things like that is very exciting to me because a lot of people, again, you're in a new country, you're trying to get by, you're trying to just live, finish your degree. But after you're done, it's people like you who will be the people that kind of are that next generation, and that skill of arts administration, knowing how to navigate things beyond just your instrument. That's going to be really key. So I think that's why it's important to your work.
Interesting. Yeah, I love the idea of this mutuality, like this partnership and respect for each other's craft and trade. And I think that that's important, knowing what's my objective as an artist. And if I don't have the capacity to do that, how can I bring in someone that has the capacity to do that and invest in the tools that are needed for them to succeed? So I remember the thing we did last year, Nika, the conference that we did last year, and we're looking for, an ASL interpreter, very specific ASL interpreter, that we had to literally send an email around the world to look for just one Swedish ASL interpreter. Now, we don't, Swedish sign language rather is different. It has some differences with American ASL, Canadian, English, British, like it's very specific. And then everybody just kind of getting onto it. Again, the mutuality of in achieving an objective, and the ways in which we're going to get there will be different, but that we respect each other. And that could mean, like Daniel saying, I don't have the forte to do that, but I'm happy to have you as a project manager, consultant, or organization. Or I'm happy to work with, if I'm coming to PACE, I'm happy to, how can I give you all the resources that are needed? And then respecting each other and each other's craft and each other's lane. I think it's critical. Thanks both of you for saying that. I want to switch to fundraising because it's always like we had like three beasts the three elephants, rather, not the beast, three elephants in the room throughout this series. One is fundraising, issue of money. The second one is capacity building, training and all of that, and what our government and all those things are doing. And then really the third one, and research and all of that. And then the third one is really around cultural policy. I want to come to fundraising and funding and all of that. What are your thoughts on this? What are the practical tips? Again, we're getting back to the practice of art management. What are the, I don't want to say best practice. I don't believe in best practice. Maybe that's my own, way of thinking about things. I don't think one practice is better, is best. It can be better, doesn't mean it's best. What are your practices? What are your tips? Without that you want to share today to art managers as they think about navigating that world, because it's real.
I think with fundraising, one of the things that we tend to do, people who are doing similar work to us, they always look at who their sponsors and fundraisers are, and then look into their programs. I think I worked at Counterpoints Arts, which is an organisation that seeks to sort of normalise migration in the UK through the arts. And one of the things that I really liked what they did is they regularly applied for funding, and because they regularly applied for funding, they had some shorthand. So they knew how to talk about the audiences, they knew how to talk about the audiences in relation to funding in relation to climate change, funding in relation to young people, funding in relation to some of the big issues that come up, and they'd always have something written that they could tweak. And I saw how quickly we could knock out a fundraising application. And we would regularly meet in team meetings, and they would say, we're going to go for this funding, has anyone got any ideas? And it's interesting today, we had a team meeting, it's the first time we've had one for a while, Natasha is part of our team. And that was one of the things that I shared with the team. I said, there's these two funding bids that we are going to go for. Anyone got any ideas? Come back with the ideas. I think the thing with fundraising is you've really got to understand the ambition and sometimes the unsaid ambition of the funder. Sometimes they can't write it because maybe it's not legal or it's not the ethical way to write things, but you've got to understand what the fund is about. So I always say to people, wherever possible, engage with that funder. Go to their events, see what excites them about work. Because sometimes you're looking at the work and on the surface, it doesn't look particularly exciting, but maybe there's a training aspect to it, or there's an aspect that is more interesting to the funder. So I know, for instance, British Council, when they would do programs of work in Nigeria, sometimes they would bring work where the technical support was very, very strong. So they weren't really bringing the company because they loved the plane. They were bringing the company because they felt like the technical manager could share something with Nigerian technical managers. So they would sometimes look at people who were good at, had a specific technical skill, somebody who's very good with lighting, someone who's very good with another aspect of delivery that was lacking in that particular environment or that particular country. So I think one has to understand that, and funders are getting more and more complex. But as someone who's engaged, I sat on the board of the European Cultural Foundation, which is a funding body in the Netherlands that was seeking really to bring Europe together through culture. We dealt with figures like 100 million euros in terms of funding and grant giving and things. We did a lot of partnership with big and small organizations. So I think that's something to think about. I think, what is your cultural capital? I know with me, most of the time when people come to me, they're coming because they want to be more diverse. They want to be linked to more diverse networks. I think initially they'd always want to connect more with Black and Asian people, but now they know I do work around disability and LGBTQ. So they want to do that, or they want to engage with the African space because they know I run the Showcase platform in Africa. So thinking, and then they come to me with an idea of developing a funding program. And I think it's nice to be able to think about that. I think the other thing that we must think about is not just in terms of monetary funds, but resource. What our networks are a massive resource. We might have a building, we might have an apartment that someone can stay in. We might have a network that's linked to a particular group, a particular community that funder has been trying to connect with in another area of work. So you might route in that way to them and build up a relationship that way. So I think about what are your resources. We have our resource for our showcase. It can be, you can present in our platform. You can launch something within our platform. You can partner with us. We can put you in touch with other like-minded individuals on the continent. We can put you in touch with other like-minded individuals or companies outside of the continent. So thinking about what other resources that you're looking for, because sometimes you might not need the physical money, you might need their stamp of approval, and that is a resource in itself. Or you might need their building. That's a resource. They might have the building open every Saturday for you, that sort of thing. When I was on the board of the Bush Theatre, which is a new writing theatre in West London, and during the Grenfell fire, so there was a big fire that happened in a building, and lots of people lost their homes. Sadly, a lot of people died. And there was a breakfast club that lost its building. They had nowhere to serve kids from some of the most deprived families breakfast. So we, as an organization, said we will make sure someone's there very early in the morning so that kids can find a place where they can have their breakfast. And it's because they had a relationship with us that they were able to say, we just need the space, we don't need any, can you get someone to open the door for us? So we need to think about it, not just in money, we need to think about our cultural capital, we need to think about other resources and how do we name those resources and give value to them so that it's not just given away for free. Tyra was having this conversation with me last night. Yeah.
It's interesting, Nikkei, you're thinking about, and I think all the time, this is something that I always say, that I think that we've so much conscripted ourselves to thinking about funding, to think about resources from only cash perspective, that we have to broaden our mindset to think about resources beyond just funding. That to look at social capital, networks, relationships, those in-kind support and all of that. And that could move around in different ways. So thanks for flagging that. Daniel, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, I know that the amazing work you're doing in the US, and I'm really looking forward to one day you and I meet in person, sit down and, a cup of coffee or tea and see what you're doing physically over there.
Okay. I actually wanted to talk about, because I think fundraising in the US and Nigeria is different. And I think since
That's right.
Africa,
and that's what I'm coming to, that I'd love to hear what you're thinking from the US perspective and then from Nigerian perspective. Fundraising. Over to you, Daniel.
Yeah. So in the US, for example, like I remember Mountain, what's it called? MFM, Mountain Fire Ministries. I know Daddy Luka pretty well, and he supported us in the past. And what I've seen in Nigeria, at times the church can be a very big factor in support. And I think in the US, there's a lot more access to grant funding. So when they asked me to talk about arts administration, I at first didn't know if I was the best person, because I recognized, even though I'm Nigerian, I was letting them know at that time, I knew nothing about what goes on in fundraising, because I think to go to a Nigerian audience and just tell them fundraising from an American perspective, it's not that helpful, because at times, if you think about like the hierarchy of needs, like um, there's some basic needs in Nigeria that aren't being met for some people. So to just be like, oh, just ask people for money, it can be hard. You know, in the US, basic needs are met. And I think it's a bit easier to have people, for example, we talk about social capital, people are willing to volunteer because they already have their basic needs. But in Nigeria, I think when I've seen the most times when people volunteer, it's typically when it comes to church and religion. And religion can be a good thing and a bad thing in terms of that fundraising aspect. Most times when I've looked at some venues that we've used in the past, it's been typically churches. Typically churches have been a big factor. But I think specifically in regards to fundraising in Nigeria, I think there's a need for diversifying funding sources. At times I always wonder, like, nonprofits in the US, it seems that we can just kind of focus on the US and just get funding from there. But at times in Nigeria, it feels like there's a need for this international donor. I think one example is the Chess and Slum, Tunde Onakaya. You know, it's based in Lagos, but if you see a lot of his work, he's kind of international. He's trying to build an international support for the organization. And then also financial management and literacy. I always like to joke, if you know Musical Society of Nigeria, I'm cool with them, but I know a lot of the alumni, and I've told the alumni till this day, I don't think Musical Society of Nigeria has released an impact report or financial report of any kind. And they do a lot of good work. But again, I have never read any documentation about specifically the numbers. And then also in terms of technology, I think a lot of people don't realize, for example, Google Nonprofits, if you are registered as a business in Nigeria, you have access to that. And that's something that you can use to support your work. And then also navigating corruption is hard at times. I know when I was in Nigeria, at times just trying to, for example, one example of like corruption in terms of like fundraising is, I feel that there's an insider circle at times. And if you're not part of that insider circle, it can be hard to access funding. And at times, maybe funding from, like, let's say certain like politicians, I would question, is that funding ethical, like the source of the money? And then also, I think what Nika talked about with the network and relationship building, that's really key. Sometimes I wonder for certain people in Nigeria, whether it's better to potentially delay the idea and become the person you need to be, then start the idea. Specifically, I have a friend who has a choir called City Choir. And I think one reason why it's really successful is because if you look at Shalom, he's the person already. So now when he wants to go his choir, like, it's so easy. Like, if you look at Shalom before the choir, he knows pretty much every Nigerian celebrity. He's really well connected with the board of directors at Mizan. Like, he's a really good storyteller. Like, he's built the person before the idea. So I think at times being patient. And the last thing I'll say is if you look at like overseas, like missionary in Japan, for example, if you want to like go there and preach about Christianity, if they go, they're not going to talk about God. What they should do, they could spend a year or two learning about the culture, the people. And I think that's very similar to the fundraising aspect. If you try to go somewhere to get money, yes, you know you need money, you know you need support, but how much time are you willing to spend learning about the culture? Because you have to be accepted. If you're not accepted, it's, I don't know, it's it's going to be really hard to get support. So that is what I'll say. Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, Nika, go ahead.
And just practical tips is that a lot of funding calls will have a webinar, or they will have a person to contact with further questions. And you'd be surprised how many people just don't take advantage of that. Because sometimes the way they write the funding call, like I said, and like being at the receiving end of that, is you're writing it, you're being careful with language, politics, political minefields that you're avoiding. So by being mindful of that, it may obscure what your real purpose is. So I think sometimes getting on the phone, getting on a webinar, having a meeting with someone where they just talk more freely, they can say, well, this is what we really mean when we write that. I think it's an important point to look at. That's just a tip.
This is great. And I also want to say that I think it's in terms of, and I know that Dana, you did mention corruption and all that. I think for me, I always want to talk about it more like the culture around fundraising itself. It's not just Nigeria, and I will use the word corruption. I think that there's a culture around fundraising generally, and that's why there's some people that once they get to know the funder, or they understand the program, they keep going back and they keep getting more and more and more. Not because it's a corrupt system, but it's just because they've built relationship, they've been able to, and they've been tested also over the years that, some people, you give them money, they're not going to deliver. Simple. And then you over and over, you're asking report, just like you mentioned, report of the program they've done. Nothing is going to come. Before they get the money, they send you emails, and the moment they get the money, you don't hear back from them. It takes them weeks to respond to you. Like, there are a lot of realities around these things that I think that the process of becoming, I love the way you put it, Daniel. At times we need to become something before you step on into what you need to do, and not necessarily be a big name, but put on the discipline, put on the opportunity, the right mindset, be able to listen to other people. Like, all of those things are part of what we are trying to become, a better version of ourselves, so that tomorrow we're not going to screw up that relationship that is so hard to get, and then you get it and you screw it up. And then we've seen that happen over and over and over again. Really, really interesting thought that both of you kind of share with us today. I want to pass it on to Natasha for maybe like last question, or close to coming to an end, I guess. Over to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Taiwo. So I do have one last question. So what should an art manager in your in your experience right now, who's based in Africa in these uncertain times, what might they take note of that can support their work in these times? Nike?
I would say there's a growing interest from diaspora communities. So we've seen that with Ghana, Homecoming. We saw that with Decibel in Nigeria. You're seeing this growing interest from diaspora, mainly African diaspora communities, but even on social media, you've seen other European communities really engaging with cooking and wearing the clothes and really getting engagement with the culture. So I think there's something about this Back to Africa movement that is becoming bigger and bigger. And the hotspots for me are places like the Gambia, Ghana, Tanzania. They tend to be the hotspots, but you can see in Nigeria, I'm seeing there's a lot more African Americans who are going to Nigeria out of curiosity just to learn. I think there's something about fair wages practice that comes up a lot. So I think we need to think about this fair wage. Nearly all the funders have asked us, how do you ensure that you're paying people a fair wage? Because we know that in Africa, particularly, when you say you're in the arts, people can always see it as quite lowly. If you're not a superstar, they don't take it seriously. A lot of artists turn up to work and then their money is reduced or they're not paid at all. So what a lot more funders are asking for fairer wages. They're asking for things around climate change, like how are you ensuring that your practices are not harming the planet, what you give them back. The other thing they're asking people to look at more is outside of these main centres, so outside of London, outside of Lagos, who are you engaging with in these spaces that don't normally have the same access to the arts? I think linked to going back to fair wages, the invisible labour, which is a big thing, Tara knows it's a big thing that I'm interested in, is all the work we do as arts administrators or producers to get it just on the table. You write down that you've got 10 days work, it's taken you 20 to get it to this stage. Everybody recognises it. And I think we as the arts need to demand better, because I'm told by researchers and academics that when looking at invisible labour, the arts are one of the worst sectors for taking advantage of people's passion and willingness. So without giving something back, and that links back to what I talked about resource. You might not be able to pay people, but there's other ways that you can remunerate people. So I think I will stop there. I will stop there and yeah.
Daniel?
Actually, Nika said it. I don't have anything else to add. So yeah, I think she said it. So
I think the other thing I want to add is what's coming up is this whole conversation around decoloniality. Coloniality, what does that mean? The European gaze, the European art made for European consumption. And Daniel talked to me about when he went back and he thought, my goodness, what am I doing? I think also this idea that people want to deconstruct and they're really interested in, there's this whole idea of agency, having agency in a global space where a lot of programs and systems deliberately exclude the average African. So I think a lot of people are picking up on it. The other thing I think I picked up on is lots of funders, and I'm telling you, as somebody who came from being on the board of a major funder in Europe, they get together and they have these conferences and decide on the themes. So you can see one of the big themes is climate change. And another theme is migration. And another theme on the continent is skills and talent development for young people, so people under the age of 35, things like that. So you start to see what are the patterns are all picking up on the same thing. So you have to be aware of that and actually, how can you now use that to tell the story of what you're doing? Because actually, I don't really think about climate change in an intentional way. It's embedded in everything that we do. And actually, when you have to write about it, you really are forcing yourself to think about actually what are the things that we do that resonate with what they are calling the climate agenda. So thinking about what those agendas are and why those agendas are in place, because a lot of funders follow those agendas. You've got the UN sustainability goals. That's coming up a lot now. I haven't seen that so much with funders, but they'll say, which goals are you aligning yourself to? So that's come up recently. So those are the sort of thing. They need to be aware politically of what's going on and why certain policies are changing and what those policies are trying to do. So there's a big EU Africa funding pool that's about to be announced in June. And some people say it's because they want to create conditions on the continent so people aren't getting into the boats and coming to Europe. It's as crude as that. And other people say, well, we're recognising this as an opportunity, it's the soft politics, to ensure that they're not drowned out by Russians and the Chinese and all these other groups of people that are coming into the continent and working closely with our leaders.
Thanks, Nika. Daniel, I consider you. Yes, go ahead, please.
When you said decolonizing, my Pan-African brain just like lit up. So I think there's one thing I would, in terms of African artists and their work in uncertain times, I've met, for example, specifically Nigerians who came to the US and they want to do, maybe like they want to be a classical violinist. And part of me is like, great, but have you also thought about in regards to your own culture? Because I think one important aspect is making sure, and I think the African proverb is like, you know, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. And the idea is that in a way, at times the work we're doing may not seem, it's important, but it may not have the recognition that we want necessarily at this time. And I think it's important to keep telling your story from your own perspective, because at times I've seen, I mean, and maybe it's the Christopher Columbus effect, when, you know, like maybe a white person comes and like they like discovered it. And no, it's always been there. So I think it's very key that even throughout these uncertain times, keep telling your story. Otherwise, I fear that history may be written or distorted from like a Western perspective. Because even within music education, I've seen within publishing, I've seen white arrangers, you know, maybe like they'll publish a work and it's, you know, they'll call it, I don't know, some Kenyan folk song. But what they'll do, you know, they'll take the elements of the Kenyan culture and they'll publish it. And in a way, what happens is that money now is kind of going towards someone who is not of the culture, and like they're taking elements of the culture to like incentivize themselves. So I think it's really important, again, to keep telling your story.
But thanks, yes, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel. And yes, Nika, I think you have one more thoughts to add. Go ahead.
Something about collaboration that's coming up more and more and more, and how we collaborate with, obviously within collaboration, there's something around compromise and what that looks like. But I remember years ago when the guy that used to be the head of the Kennedy Center, I can't remember, he talked about the importance of collaborations and networks. And with the way that we work with the Pan-African Creative Exchange, we couldn't deliver most of what we deliver without some kind of collaboration or sense of camaraderie, you know. And collaboration can come in all sorts of ways. Like somebody on my team, she proofread for years for us. She would look at all the artist marketing materials and make sure that it made sense and it was well written and there wasn't any spelling errors and things. And then maybe 3 years after, I mentioned her to somebody at my university, and she's now been working with the university for about four years. Because I'm thinking about that it isn't always what people want money. Sometimes people want mentorship. Some people want access to networks, and really recognizing your value in these spaces and what you can bring. And the last thing that we lead with a lot at Pace is be generous. You know what I mean? I've got a mindset of plenty. So even if I tell you about funding and you get the funding and I don't, I'm like, something else will come for me. Do you know what I mean? That mindset of feast rather than famine mentality. And I think that's more than ever, we have to have that as a pushback against what we're being told. People are taking things away from us. Actually, think about what you can add to the space, and that recognize that sometimes someone gets it because their value is right for that time, their contribution is right for that time. Yours might come later, or yours might come in a different way. And I think there's something about recognizing your blessings on all levels. Not just, oh, I've got a big funding, but actually a blessing that I've got Natasha on the team at Pace. That's a huge blessing. I've got Taiwo, who comes in and mentors and partners and is incredibly generous with research and academia. Those to me are massive blessings that I don't overlook, and I'm grateful for.
Sounds like this is a good place to put a pause on this conversation today. Two things. Until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. So it's our responsibility to share stories of the culture and find ways to continue to sustain the sharing of those stories. The change of mindset from a scarcity mindset to abundance mindset. And I think that that's something that we constantly need to think about. The idea of not thinking that they're coming to take everything away from me, because fundraising itself and funding application and that, it's designed that way that you take and that person doesn't take. It's a lot of the time what I always tell myself and others is, if I'm being given that money, then somebody else is not getting it. So what does that mean in the ecosystem, and how that can then we use whether it's me that get it or somebody else? Can we think together in a way to help us build in that, again, that abundance thinking? So that generosity is really, really critical. With that, we want to say thank you so much to Jonah, co-executive director, the founder and the co-executive director of Pan-African Creative Exchange, and a shout out to them. They're having their the showcase. It's happening. The fourth showcase is happening in July. What's the date again?
It's the 9th to the 13th of July.
The 9th.
In South Africa.
Yeah, the 9th to the 13th of July in Bloemfontein, South Africa. I have to tell you, I've been there, I've given a keynote there before, had great conversation in 2023. I've sent my theater company there for showcase. I was there in 2023, and one of my current PhD students came from there. So I have a lot of personal connection and stories to the showcase that is happening. You know, if it'll be nice, we're inviting folks to come see shows, but also come, you're going to see a lot of talents, a lot of artists and their work. They're ready to go to market or also at different stage of development. So thank you to Nike. Also thank you to Daniel Kumapayi at Akojopo, the amazing work that Daniel is doing over there, and the work that he's doing between Nigeria and the US, and really creating space to preserve, to sponsor, to support artists in their own way, and really offering that service. Because I think that, again, like you rightly said, these things that there's technical skills and all of those skills that goes into managing and producing and doing all of this. These are things that has to be developed over the years. And some artists they've not had the capacity. They don't have the capacity to do that, or they've not even developed it at all. Akojopo is such a unique initiative at this point in time. So please feel free to reach out to Daniel, because he'll be happy to engage with you and see what's possible in terms of collaboration. Thanks to Natasha. She's been sort of my co-conspirator in this co-presenting in the past. It's over a month now. So thank you for taking the time and doing this together. It's really a privilege. I want to say thank you to Howrand TV Theatre Commons for believing in the vision and supporting us. This is my third series with them. So it's a reason why I keep going back, because again, I believe in really sharing knowledge in a broad sense way that is accessible and open to other people. Thanks to Center for Socially Engaged Theater, and Tara Eldred has been there kind of the one sort of helping me pull, do all the details thing behind the scene. And I always say, we talked about invisible labor. Some of us just show up. Yes, we got the idea, we put it together, but somebody's got to operationalize it, and they're amazing. And of course, a lot of partnership that I have means that I can't devote myself to just one single thing. I have support, and I really want to recognize that. Thanks to Theatre Ministry International and its Social Enterprise Mobile Research Lab for the research and the due diligence, because again, those things have to go into all of the project that we do. And thanks to Kininso Concept, with them, we're able to come up together with the 14 names that 14 remarkable guests that we have came through a lot of work with Theatre Ministry International and Mobile Research Lab, Kininso Concept, Nike at Pan-African Creative Exchange. So thank you to you. And of course, thank you to Lasite, who two episodes, we have French translation. And then for the entire episode itself on the website, we have French translation. And am I missing anyone else again? I think that's everybody. So I want to say thank you. And then our last and final episode is next week, Tuesday, same time. And we're going to be talking about what next. And so really hoping that you're going to join us. And then we hope that this has been a good opportunity to learn and to connect. So with that, from my end, I'm signing out. It's Ostawa Falabi, and look forward to seeing you next week, Tuesday, same time, same place.